Yeah, sure.
The order, it's 3 off case starts on framework, just will be top down, and then the advantages starting with this food stuff and then development.
So you said case was top down?
Case is the framing is top down, the case on the advantages will be the food stuff, and then the first part advantage.
So framing food first advantage.
Yeah.
Sounds very bottom up.
Oh yeah, I guess so.
I'm good to go.
Good?
Yeah.
Planned justice requires African open border migration, except for tourism emerging outside of African countries to have tourism at enough levels to 7% of GDP growth. Human migration is temporary movement. I have no data migrant. Common understanding of a person who moves away temporarily, permanently. Migrant can be temporary, which is different from immigration. Richards 250 migrations are broader with respect to relocation. Immigration is area. Migration is only temporary, who leaves out of willingness free to return back. Temporary migration includes tourism. Folks, routine temporary migration is migration for a specified and limited period of time. Tourism. Open borders means unlimited who can cross for any reason. Plans incredibly vague. No sounds the means air negative since they butchered their plan to be as possible. Hornberger 21. Open borders looks like a state with borders, no guards, patrols, visa requirements, or entry quotas, any freedoms to cross regardless of the reasons. Tourism marks the environment, we tumble. 22 tourism, green, degradation, extinction, and depletion of natural resources. High tourism season goes against the water cycle from which cycle will not having enough water to grow. Tourism turns a higher amount of fossil fuels and hurts the whole ecosystem. Will be forced the biodiverse wetlands, impacts the local wildlife, natural habitats destroyed, land used for building materials or collected for fuel, cut the credit, fuel, Africa key to solve global biodiversity, Kanako 20. Africa compromise a quarter of global biodiversity, supports the Earth's largest intact and submerges a lot of animals, established many examples of success and innovation in the conservation, yet growth create challenges, biodiversity cause extinction. Towards 16, 6 months extinction is underway, ecosystems undergo a abrupt reversal shift when they reach a tipping point. Planetary scale transition could precipitate results, could be widespread social unrest, economic instability, for loss of human life, or more destructively biodiversity theft, or multiplier that will exacerbate conflicts and introduce new struggles between state interests, constitute the existential threat. Next off, the meta-ethic is considered in first value theory that existence of intrinsic goods requires unconditional human growth. Course when a rational being undertakes an action, they suppose the object to be good. There must be on something that is unconditionally good, considered as a sufficient condition of their goodness. If the inclinations and needs found only don't exist, their object would be without worth. The unconditionally valuable thing must be humanity. Regarding your existence as a rational being as an end itself, as subject to principle of human action, we must regard ourselves as capable of conferring value because we must regard our ends as good. We must regard others as ends themselves. Second, regrets, we can always ask for you to follow theories, say they aren't binding because they don't have a starting point, practical reason themselves. When we ask that we should follow reason, we demand a reason which concedes to the authority of reason themselves, so that we follow. If you're all reasons, the operative principles that apply to me must also apply to you, since they're binding. It makes no sense to say that cheapest use for me but not for you. That justifies the universal ethic based on respecting freedoms, otherwise it leads to contradictions. The standard is considered with the unknown law of all states have a right to self-determination because their members are autonomous and have control over their political dominions, while open border men directly violate the rights of states constituents. They violate the right to choose. For example, if 2 parents send their child to school with a cheeseburger, the teacher replaces it with a vegetarian meal, and violate the parents' right to legislate. If their own autonomy is violated, and B point, the vegetarian meal will tell. Here, self-determination requires free association, including the right to exclude development. Self-determination value stands for the right not to associate. The government who decide who would marry into who may lead to the best possible lives. But what if Jack would prefer to be married to Joe? Citizens would be aghast. Each of it enjoys moral dominion over own affairs. The second party must not be allowed to associate unless one or two are willing. Freedom of association includes the discretion to reject association. Immigration forces people to associate. Political states are different from a club, just like how Harvard doesn't have to accept me because I'm a good student, and because they're self-determining. States can reject others on any basis. Well, meant to. First, that freedom of association more important than intimate relations amounts to conceding rights to the association are more valuable in intimate context, not that they don't exist elsewhere. Second, that are in non-intimate association, religious association, political group. Third, members of insignificant associates like Google calls are concerned about over potential members. First, the size of can affect the experience of being a member. For fear of decreased access. Second, all new members will have a say in how the club is organized, even though citizens will never meet the majority of compatriots. Foreigners affect the makeup economy, and changes will be for the worse. One fellow citizens all charting in the role of the country. No collective can be fully self-determining without enjoying freedom of association. Thus, sovereignty includes the right to exclude foreigners. Next off, moral anti-realism said that there are no truths that hold independently of evaluative attitudes. Utilitarian collapsism proves that morality is impossible. One, the Darwinian dilemma. If evolution has shaped how we form our beliefs, that means that moral truths are best contingent. If we just evolve differently, we'd have different moral beliefs. Our beliefs are not necessarily true, but are conditioned on our circumstances. Evolutionary pressure favors survival, not moral correctness, meaning that our aversion to fate is entirely biological. Don't let them say that evolution favors you. The chance of us evolving to find the correct answer is incredibly low. We're unlikely to find the source of morality too. Isaac experience the phenomenal only tells us what is not what ought to be, but it's impossible to derive an outcome descriptive premises. So there needs to be additional operative premises within the numerals to make a moral theory. 3, induction is circular. You only know induction works because that's the experience that told you has, but that's also for induction. So use induction to prove induction. 4, util auto negates what's dx. They don't do anything to change the status of utilitarianism, and utilitarianism is about specific states of affairs, i.e. what would be good in this situation, not as a general rule of all insofar as circumstances could change. Our interpretations of the act must prove that justice requires open borders. Negate if we prove that a concept of justice is impossible. Justice is a condition. Cambridge Dictionary condition being morally correct. Prefer precision. The resolution says justice, not sure. The resolution is the most predictable stasis point for debates. Anything inside of that ruins prep and classify line the out to pick any grounds for debate. In our model, exclude things like offers which prevents tricks. The case page. Top level, no new util justifications in the 1 year causes late-breaking debates where the 2 gives 2 speeches on explaining why they're correct while they only get 1 where they have infinite recontextualizations. Line by line proper. 1, disagreements. A point is that there are no disagreements under the a priori. People are just wrong. For example, 2 plus 2 cannot be but 4 and 5. I cannot drive 4 set a triangle. B point, but people disagree about what causes pain and pleasure, even if they agree that it's a good end goal proven by centuries of conflict between utilitarian governance. 2, Papano. A point is false. We're still governed by a priori principles, even if we access them through the natural world. They still hold true. For example, 2 plus 2 is 4 no matter how our experiences. Kant avoids the problem of physicalism, even though we are affected by our instincts. We use the numeral rule to escape this bias. B point is reason double blind. 1, doesn't matter how we develop our reason capacities because it's a question that means that you admits that you have all principles that are binding, but our framework is also mind independent, so truth exists even if our capacity is limited. 2, cross by the Darwinian dilemma. Our ability to understand morality is flawed. 3, the phenomenal introspection argument. 8 point, there's no reason why I can phenomenally introspect a moral property from the physical world. They've made a jump, but they haven't justified why it's going to happen. B point is that animals can also introspect that certain properties exist. You wouldn't say that they're also moral agents, so there's a disconnect. For the Blum evidence, the cross by the Darwinian dilemma, evolution is also irrelevant. The case page. The unique advantage opening is BS. They can't overcome fractured governments, lack of cooperation. Simply opening borders isn't going to resolve decades of cultural tensions, for example, Ethiopia and Eritrea. The development advantage. Internal links to trade are predicated on boosting the African continental free trade area. We're showing that here's when I see evidence for being insert the Horia 22 evidence. AFCTFA cements industry first practices that promote industrial agriculture. Hub link in Casa 22. Farmer seed systems came under type by AE formalized guidelines establishing centralized seed and biotechnology framework implemented within ASC, FTA process, endangered seed systems and farmers' rights situated seed and food systems like commercial and industrial agenda promotion, protect the interests of corporate freedom, corporation shift their focus on Africa as the world. Next, breadbasket invest into industrial agriculture and clean practices and chemicals, pesticides chemicals. In particular, it hurts women. Grain 20. AFCFTA loses every Africa. What does this mean for African women? AFCFTA is a continental extension of the corporate-driven trade agenda. A large part of what trade within Africa is informal. 70% of this is food trade. Women are the main group concerned. Critical role in seed systems. Track record of past FTAs in regard to women have not been good. FTAs promote the exploitation of cheap labor to attract welfare export, and women constitute a major part. Privatization of seeds through IP rules undermines women's access to planting materials and the right to continue the work of seed saving, exchange, and experimentation that forms the backbone of agricultural instability. Access to medicines for women countered by the property rules, IP rules from trade agreements. Privatization of waters result in services liberalization, result in reduced access to water. Special economic zones of free trade deals make provisions for providing intense examples of exploitation of workers, offer the worst working conditions, which breeds a culture of violence against women. War sentences and legitimized through the AFCFTA, plantation companies, and agribusinesses, which are incentivized and protected by investment liberalization. Displace both farmers and land grabs and promoting an industrial food system that is unsustainable. Cut it unsustainable. Industrial ag causes extinction standards in Congress 21. Big agriculture cannot be supported by empirical evidence. Atmosphere, oils, soils, and biosphere are in various phases of collapse, undermining the planet's ability to support life. As a heart of multiple connected crises, animal agriculture accounts for 14.5% of anthropogenic greenhouse gas emissions. Forest loss and species extinction only increased burning. Forest agriculture has been scaled. Loads of pesticides and fertilizers have risen. Hard to find clean fresh water. Cut the cardiac fresh water. Continued exploitation of women hinders economic development. Turns case rains 18. Africa's largest development is create enough quality jobs and decent work in a way that how to incorporate women in a way that goes beyond the quotas and targets that fail to address the gender equality. Countries, women's face, measure gender opportunity. The country's economic development are in inclusive growth. African women constitute the majority of workers in the informal economy. SMEs, main engines of job creation. Women's partnerships as SMEs stand as a third Africa's demographic because is dependent on the full inclusion of women.
Okay, good for CX.
Was that last card marked?
The last card, no.
Okay, cool.
Are you good?
Yes.
Okay, counterpoint status.
Condo.
Okay, anti-realism, all of these seem to be indices of util. If Kant is true, does this go away?
Yeah.
Okay, Kant, let's talk about the contention arguments. The second one is about sort of people's right to associate. This evidence seems to be in the context of, like, if I force someone to, or like if the government forced someone to enter my home, immigration, like free immigration just means that people can enter the country, not that I'm forced to like interact with them or associate with them. Why does like reducing immigration restrictions cause that?
Well, I mean, I think that you still be forced to associate them first by like the necessary part of like immigration. For example, if I pack 100 people in a room together, you can be like, well, they don't have to talk to each other. Obviously, there are factors in pushing 100 people in one room that would
I guess
affect each other.
these cards, which are like forces people to associate, which part of them is about immigration?
The Wellman evidence specifically says that sovereignty includes a right to exclude foreigners. The second evidence provides
okay,
like
how do
three
you determine
warrants.
what counts as a foreigner?
We'd say that people who are not already citizens of the state.
What is the distinction between a citizen and a non-citizen?
One of them has signed a social contract and the other one has not with a specific government that they
The
were
reason
trying to
those
enter.
people didn't sign that contract is because they were excluded in the first place. Why does that not prove that like there's no actual distinction between the two?
I think that you have the ability to choose whoever you want to associate with. Like, you can always say, like, oh, why aren't you friends with that person? They'd be such a nice person if you get to know them. And you can always say, I don't want to. Like, sure,
okay.
you haven't given them a chance, but you're not morally obligated to.
What is the on what bases can states exclude individuals?
We'd say that the burden of the negative is just to prove the aff wrong, which means that even
I'm just asking, like, what is the basis for them excluding
I think
people?
that I can just say I don't want to associate with you. I don't think that people need to provide a specific reason.
Can I say I don't want to associate with African American people because I dislike
We don't
them?
have to defend every single reason why we exclude people.
So
we just
travel
have to
ban,
say
good,
that
bad?
there's well, if let's just say like I don't want to associate with you because
Is the
we don't
travel
have
ban
the same-
legitimate?
What do you mean?
Trump's travel ban, would that be legitimate under the NC?
If you just listen to what I just said before, we don't need to prove that every single reason we have to exclude people is good, just that the aff has an unconditional burden to defend that all instances of inclusion are good. Disproving one means that you should negate because that is the only burden that I need to meet.
Okay, the sort of states have right to self-determination. Can you, so the parts that are like negating are about individual people's rights. This stuff is about like the state having self-determination. If states are the ones that are like autonomous, why is like the individual people relevant, I guess?
If you look at the analytic above that, it explains how you can still harm someone's rights even if you do target a group or part of them. For example, if I send a child off with like soy milk and they return back with whole like fat-free milk and the teacher gives it to them, I can say that violated my rights directly because like even if whole milk is healthier, like well I mean like let's just say your parents send you to like the TOC and you're like I'm gonna compete in LD and they're like we're putting you in PF. Your parents will probably say that's not what we wanted to do because we intended you to go into LD. I mean even if PF is better for your like life enrichment, you wouldn't say it's a good idea to be able to take your rights away like that. It's arbitrary.
Okay, I will start from. Other than the usual stuff, was there anything not in the doc?
There was like the util auto negates, and there was like one like there was just like a couple like one line of like elaboration on the
Framework.
if for all reasons all approved principles that apply to me must apply to you. It's not like an independent warrant or anything.
Okay. Okay, I have 159 left. Order is the counterplan, anti-realism, and the knowledge, and I'll send out a doc. Okay, that should be so. Okay, it should be sent out. Just let me know when you're all good.
Okay, I'm good.
Give me 2 seconds.
Yeah.
You said counterplan, anti-realism, con.
Yeah.
I'm good to go.
All right. Conditionalities of voting issue one strategy forces the one to argue against multiple worlds, which different uniqueness conditions, which prevents us from taking advantage of strategic interactions and contradicting thinking. Counterplan out of impact towards or DH to the case and read advocacies that link to each other and conceding across one or responses, which forces the after debating ourselves and insights the next. From a robust testing given to LDC times proven by them reading offense and under multiple frameworks anticipate two clash. An argument involving lowers the barrier to entry, which incentivizes spamming short advocacy, spreading the one year from consolidating offense and warps research incentives by turning the one and seeing the 1 year into bluff storms instead of well-developed positions. Also kills argument and responsibility because the negative is never held accountable for putting low quality advocacies in the one and see always because out of round education, multiple rounds, all their impacts, but clash only in round no RBIs and 1 or 3 or 1 means an extended back on offense for 6 minutes and the app would always lose. 2 deter checking bill abuse for fear of a practical counter which kills fairness and the ability to test violations. 3 you don't win for proving you're fair because it's unreasonable. The anti-realism and NC I'm conceding that Kant is true. They said this is only contingent on util, but I'm just going to answer the independent justifications just in case. Kant solves the Darwinian dilemma a priori facts are objective and not grounded or subjective basis. It's 2 it solves the is not gap since it adds in those additional a priori principles. It also solves induction since we look at the intrinsic quality of our actions instead of looking at things in the physical world. They've also proven that a concept of justice is possible by normally adjusting a framework so they can't go for this. The comp page. Returning their contention arguments 1, borders valid the means end principle or the categorical imperative crop out. 17. Externalizing only divert migration make them more dangerous than discuss human rights violations. FTC turns like the borders returns accomplished with the violence without sufficient access to individual needs valid sounds. Imperative never treat the others only means 2. They also violate the law of hospitality but maybe 12. A world without borders, children who end up on once they cannot be penalized conditions to change their life and well-being. It becomes a risk of illegality to survive righteous and well here's way Kant called the bill or Oakland to seek refuge over universal right of hospitality providing intentions of the foreigner or peaceful such belong to each being who had to share their 3. The planet is consistent with the categorical imperative universal right or universal law and human rights globalization voids the distinction between citizens and non-citizens morality. 2. Open borders through content ethics policy must pass the universal law test immigration policy should right from ideas universally accepted globalization or standard proof. Trade $10 billion which won't prevent $1 trillion organizations or nationless identity based on global or nations and border drop identity to the issue. Million markets of a kind of political structure change globalization policy should do the same to a multicultural one that acknowledge transnational subset of Kant's categorical imperative pass in universal law test consistent with interests of human rights. Kant argues that human rights is a criterion of principal policy. Universal declaration includes freedom of movement in China's under this right to move to the next by the law entire country experience obviously enforces can't consequently leave a say as a work interior and intrinsic right to move and knowledge consistent with country rights. 4. The innate right to freedom grounds the right to original possession of the Hutchinson. 1. Original right to place in earth or to chase for freedom. I'll have a right to wherever it has place and even if all land claimed by others right to exist on earth freedom. Means why no one may kill or me deny me earth was on my death. No one can express their freedom if able to be some that justifies non-refoulement or open borders. Hutchinson. 1. Caught right to place a pleasure refugee says territory express any freedom instead of pursue hospitality justify any freedom of a state to expel a refugee leaving the nowhere violate freedom for our right to original possession. Humans have freedom request assistance and existence requires a place on the one has a right to be where one cannot help being and not be said away. Immigration restrictions beg the question to violate the fundamental equality of persons through morally arbitrary distinctions which answers their contention arguments about citizens versus non-citizens. 11. Distinction cannot be made through liberal laws, logical intervention, the question attempts to exclude non-members, to the decision of rights of citizens, embodied within institution which ensure the rights to exclude all real citizens, the whole rights of non-citizens, but this takes the body for granted non-citizens can access to resources. 2. Economic prosperity will live in a globalized economy. As I said, once they are only ones who contribute to non-citizens, many citizens do no work to non-citizens, surely those and able to contribute because they're on the inside and outside, there's any because outside the fact that they have not made a contribution to track here. Well, what does that take as a right to make a contribution? It's difficult to see how a decision can be coherent moral priority, have to do with egalitarian liberal theory, litigation, justified priority. People really trusted to be here, ironically, that only justifies things that can justify morality, special rights. In fact, complete freedom of movement, collective property, immigration restrictions violate the freedom of association. Background 14 rights all have is associated with whomever immigration controls to infringe that crossing international borders not harm property, protected action for any use of random people for meaning above arguments prove there's no relevant basis for the distinctions between citizens and non-citizens, which answers all the contentious arguments, and open borders don't violate your right to choose. Nothing about open immigration forces you to interact with foreigners, and you still have the ability to avoid them. This often is consequential as not intrinsic to migration requirements because it depends on people interacting after. The first card is about people being forced to enter your house, not migration. Their card is like, if the government forced me to marry someone, that would be bad, which is many degrees off from immigrants being able to be in the public sphere. The second card is also about marriages and intimate relations, which isn't relevant. The last card is also not determinate. It says we have a right to include or exclude foreigners. We have contention offense implicating freedom of association above, and only we have external ones about the categorical imperative. So if there's any muddling on whether or not there's a freedom to include versus exclude, you should vote on our other contention imperatives because only we have external offense.
Cool. I'll take the rest of It'll be condo, and then it will be Kant. Kant will start off with the counterplan.
So condo will begin with the counterplan? Or what did you say at the end?
The contention debate, sorry.
Oh, okay. I heard Kant will begin with the counterplan.
Kant will begin with the counterplan, like the contention debate.
Oh, okay.
Let me know if everyone's good.
I'm sorry, I was tuned out. You said condo contention. Is there something else in there that I missed?
Condo contention, the counterplan will be done with the contention layer.
Okie dokie. Give me 2 seconds. Good to go.
Okay.
Was there a dot?
No dot.
I'm good.
Countertrip the negative conditional advocacies. Countertrip we get one advocacy, one is the most logical. The rule of negative for the appad will be after proof that they're optimal. Every counterplan establishes an opportunity cost of plan. Any limit that is arbitrary. Also prove that you should judge KK this way is better than the counterplan logic. Whereas every other standard is a side control. You wouldn't vote with your arguments that us being passed was a voting issue, even if it made the alpha made the round less equal to key to neg flags. They set the terms of beta the plan better. So multiple options sure they don't the neg doesn't auto lose after the 1 year. It weighs 8 point against harder choosing the plan and 2 year collapse means that the alpha controls the direction of the B point size of link, even if being alpha is harder than the abstract. They make effective one as possible. Give us no options which overcompensate C point. Their instrument makes it impossible to be negative. So you ask independently locks and neg losses. 3 fosters emphasis first the out event. Every component of the plan allows rigorous testing and allows better info processing by enabling discussion on linear issues for its most real policymakers take about from different angles. One themselves one criticism they can amend a trade position to find the best option. Top level on condo all arguments are condo. There's no way for teams to go for every possible argument. 2 countertrips are offense because I pick an advocacy by the end of the debate. They get the entire 2 years to do impact calc 3 multiple perms check because they're functionally unlimited condo. Obviously they can jettison by admission. Denying the neg condo kills reciprocity because they can make forms of perms that we can never we have to answer them all, but we can't get the counterplan. 4 less conditional obviously means the neg reads more dishead, which they can always take out ways since disheads are often when the round burst counterplans are just defense, and the app can read generic solvency deficits for counterplan, but generic responses won't answer nuance. Disheads and top level on their shell 1. The top level on the 1AC shell 1 is that one they say testing except for this is just solved by getting better, right? You have to have a strategic positioning. You can say that things like tourism are not topical, or you can use generic solvency deficits. For example, the Austrian app is like a regionalism sort of dishead to every single counterplan, which means that this is solved by a second. They are clash except for this is not a short advocacy in the 1 and C. Every neg wants their advocacies be able to be gone for in the 2 and R. Obviously, if I reach short advocacy, that's just going to hurt me more, and you can just point this out by saying there's no warrant, and this is super under highlighted, which means that bad arguments will resolve themselves. Third, they say argument responsibility. I read literally 1 condo that this is as responsible as I can be. The neg can also punish with straight terms on other layers, which is exactly what you did in this round. Also proves that if that isn't true, that just means that I can upload with anything. No reason that why I can't read like 20 different discrepancies with skep triggers on all of them. Also, they didn't say reasonability or competing interests. Don't let them cross-apply RVI warrants because those are specific to RVIs. Use reasonability. If I win persuasive defense that abuses marginal enough not to abandon substance to vote on it, unreasonable. The point of debate is to be able to contest each other's arguments, and I should be able to do that in any way. Prefer 1 because the norming theory requires abandoning substance at a norm, which means that norm must outweigh voting on theory set substance, extreme offense, defense, and risk of offense. Disincentivizes quality engagement, which matters because becoming persuasive arguments debates only impact, and suboptimality is inevitable. There's always something I could spectrum made slightly clearer and turns their argument second because prioritizing diminishing marginal skews over doesn't mean that theory has no impact because any justification presents an end goal of actual engagement. The contention. Here is the burden structure of the round. The app must defend that we must open borders to everyone under any circumstance. That was the truth testing burden that they have to prove that a justice unconditionally requires something. The only burden of the negative is proving that we do not have to do that. We do not have to defend a specific reason to include. All I need or exclude. All I need to do is present one case where it could be convincing enough to exclude someone, and you should negate. I'm going to go for the counterplan. You can't just concede a counterplan just because it has util offense, because it can have continual implications of a reason for why we can't exclude. Judge kick if we lose a counterplan. All of the 1 area is centered on excluding refugees or people based on factors they cannot control, like race, gender, etc. But the counterplan does the opposite, except for it takes out of tourism, which they've conceded is competitive. The tourism counterplan just bans tourists. This is not linked to any of their offense because tourism is something that you willingly do. For example, if I go to sightsee in Rome, I'm not fleeing a refugee crisis. I'm not being excluded off the basis of the race. I'm being excluded because I want to have tourism. There's no reason as to why they've warranted in the 1 year where you should specifically let people sightsee other countries. That's like saying I can walk up to your house and peek inside because I'm curious to what is sort of in there. They need to explain why there's offense, and there's none of that on the counterplan explicitly. The 2 year is going to be a bunch of new cross-ups. You should hold the line. Your question shouldn't just be, did the tutor answer everything the tutor has like a checklist? It should be, could I reasonably expect the tutor to be able to predict what the tutor is going to go for given the 1 year coverage? And given that there just wasn't any 1 year coverage, that should be incredibly persuasive. Now, even if you don't buy that, I'm going to go for the well-known evidence that says that we can exclude. It has several warrants. Now, just you can extend them. First is that when you have citizenship, it's sort of when you include people into citizenship, it affects the way that people work. For example, if I have a small club of friends and I want to play board games, and then I have to force everyone to join, and I have to force it. I'm forcibly forced to accept everyone who joins my club. That means that they can vote by majority and change what the club is about, which means that it still violates my rights, even if not directly, because my voting power is diminished and the amount of autonomy I have within that space is reduced. Second is that people can exclude for some reasons. They've conceded, like the example of Harvard. If I go to Harvard, I'd say you have to accept me because I'm a really good student, and if you don't, that's discrimination. Harvard can just say no. There's no reason why private entities or states have to say yes to anyone, because they can simply say no. Otherwise, they'd be forced to say jobs have to hire everyone who applies, colleges have to accept everyone who applies, the judge has to vote for both of us, because otherwise it's excluding one of us for the ballot. You can arbitrarily discriminate on you can arbitrarily pick a line on whatever you want to. Now, I'll answer all this Yes, third is that unconditional exclusion. Inclusion isn't always good. For example, a gender minority only debate organization like Women in Debate should not have to let in men, even if it does exclude them on the basis of all men are equal to gender minorities. They are allowed to say those things. You cannot look me in the eye and say that things like women's homeless shelters aren't necessarily always a bad thing because they divide by race or gender factors. This is incredibly unintuitive. Or a sex offender near a school, even if they say, I will no longer do bad actions, and technically you can't preempt future violations if induction fails. They do open doors to everyone. That was in CX in this scenario, or maybe you aren't directly interacting with a sex offender. They pay taxes to go in the public, they pay taxes to school, they pay taxes to be on the sidewalk, but they make you uncomfortable, and you're allowed to say, I don't want you there. Now, I'll answer the one error. The pig solves all this offense insofar as none of it's contextual. First, the Crepo evidence is specific to how if you turn away someone, they're going to die. Ask yourself, if induction fails and we cannot know the external world, how am I going to know someone dies? Second, doesn't apply to tourism. I'm not going to die if I can't sightsee and destroy Africa's environment, which means that this doesn't link. They say law of hospitality. This is essentially the same offense repeated. We're not going to go for the law of hospitality is necessarily bad, but just that they have not justified it on their specific side, because the one error is all on we need to let in refugees, which doesn't matter. The Marinelli evidence talks about how universal law test, but they have not warranted why so, except for it's going to benefit the economy. That seems like a consequence. I don't really care. Even if someone's going to benefit me, I can still say I don't want to associate with you because I have the right to exclude, and you can cross-apply the Wellman evidence as well to the Cole evidence to prove why you do not have innate, even if people are innately equal, you can still say no. Those are all the that stuff that was conceded. The Hutchinson evidence about refugees. If I turn away a refugee, it will die. The tourism counterplan solves the entirety of the app. If you turn away people, they aren't going to die. Tourists make a willing choice, which means it's not on arbitrary bases.
Okay, I had 159. Starting now. Okay, it's just Kant.
Which arc's it starting on? I got the counterpunch stuff elsewhere.
I would flow it straight down on the contention. There's some top level stuff and then extensions of one error cards.
Okay.
Are we all good?
Okay, I'm good, yeah.
Alright. Frame this debate through the fact that the 2NR has no proactive reason why excluding tourists is necessary or bad. They've given a bunch of different examples in other contexts, things like clubs, homeless shelters, rape, etc. But those are all distinct, and they have no actual example about immigration or a proactive reason for why we should exclude tourists from other countries. Those cases or examples they cited are different. For example, the rapist case, those people are morally distinct because they've done repugnant actions. The case about women's shelters, those people are morally distinct because they're different types of people, etc. All of the 2NR examples are in a different context about specific places, like specific context-dependent places, like a women's shelter, but not about a globalized world or a place where everyone is interconnected, which is unique to immigration, which is a linked distinction between our terms and their examples that they have given. The only question of this debate is that if in the context of a tourist outside of a country, if there is a morally relevant distinction between someone from outside of that country and the person inside of it, you should extend 3 one-year cards here. First, our Cole evidence, it is far, far better than theirs. All of theirs are about things like marriages or the government forcing people to enter another person's home, not immigration. Our Cole evidence answers most of the distinctions between people inside of countries and outside of countries. It says that the argument that there is a moral distinction between citizens and non-citizens begs the question, because the only potential reason why citizens are distinct from non-citizens is because the government gave rights to citizens or because citizens contributed to the economy. But those are all question begging, because the reason why the outsiders can contribute to the economy is because they were excluded in the first place. The only reason why they don't have those rights is because the border wasn't open in the first place, so they couldn't enter. The fact that a priori there's no difference between tourists from one country versus one country outside of Africa and one inside of Africa proves that there's not a difference between those people, and the only reason why the former is inside and the latter is outside is because the government arbitrarily restricted them in the first place. If I win this argument, you should discount every example they've given about clubs, other contexts, etc., because they're not specific to immigration, the context of globalization, interconnectedness, and the fact that immigration affects everyone in the world and it's not just a particular club means, and not just a particular club means that their examples are not relevant. There are 2 terms I'm extending. First, freedom of association. This inverts the argument they've gone about forcing people to interact. The one-year evidence from 2014 says that if you don't let someone into a country, or if you restrict them from immigration, it also violates their freedom to associate with other people because they're not able to interact with other people, go abroad, etc., which turns their only contention argument, and is the only evidence that is actually about immigration, because their contention argument about freedom of association at the bottom says, quote, there's a right to include or exclude, so you should have extreme skepticism about their arguments about exclusion. Lastly, the Marinelli evidence, it says that open borders is consistent with universal law, things like the fact that the world is globalized and interconnected and that everyone sort of interacts with each other through factors like trade, etc., means that everyone is interconnected at some level, and there's no sort of moral basis to exclude people, and the only relevant thing you can do is to let them in because of this sort of the fact that people are all interconnected transcends borders. None of the 2NR explanation had a proactive justification for kicking out tourists. All of their examples are in other contexts. You know that there is at least some difference between immigration and things like a random club, and only our evidence is actually conclusive about immigration. All of theirs is in other contexts about things like marriages, etc. So you should defer to have evidence because only we have external offense.
Good round.
Good debate.